Okay, are we live? We are now live.
Ooh, right on time.
We're right on to 6:30. Let's see how many we have here. Am I full screen? Can't see how many people are on right now. But anyways, welcome everyone who has joined. We have it looks like seven. Oh, they're all popping in now. We had about 40 who had registered for the event, and so I expected that number to go up even higher today as people continue to share with others. We did shut down the registration on Wednesday because we want to start the webinar off with a random prize drawing. And so for those of you who were able to pre-register before Wednesday, we're going to use this as an icebreaker and allow those who are still logging in to get into the webinar. And so, Cassie, why don't you put up the random prize drawing wheel, and let's see if we can give away another prize here today before we get started with our money and marriage webinar. Yeah.
I want to know the prize.
Yes.
Oh,
Oh,
man.
yeah.
Okay. All right.
I don't see my name on the wheel.
I
know.
know.
Where's my name?
Pastor George is on it.
There. Oh,
Oh,
all right. Here, there. Linda Daniel, thank you so much for pre-registering. Congratulations on being our random prize drawing winner.
So exciting.
Yeah. And what do they win?
I don't know.
It's a mystery prize.
They win a coffee gift card. So we'll be sending out a coffee gift card to you, Linda, by email. And so thank you again for pre-registering, and all of you who did pre-register. Appreciate that very much, and for sharing with any other couples. I know sometimes we also have couples that join together in the same room. And so today's webinar is on money and marriage, and I'm very excited about this today, talking about money and marriage. I shared in the promotions that money is a common cause of conflict in marriage, and unfortunately causes a lot of frustration in a marriage, and causes couples to drift farther and farther apart. And so if we can learn some things about money today as a couple, it could potentially lower the frustrations in our life and help us to live a happier life and have a happier marriage. And in addition to that, it will also help us to prepare for our future. And so a couple of scripture verses. I have a slide for these scripture verses I'd like to share that I often think about when I'm making decisions about money. And that could be, about wise decisions about money, as well as poor decisions or risky decisions. And so these are from Proverbs. It says, Proverbs 21:20, the wise have wealth and luxury, but fools spend whatever they get. This has often been paraphrased as, a fool and his money are soon departed. And so I don't like it when money just leaves my pocket or my bank account. I don't know where it went. I just don't feel like I made good decisions there, and definitely didn't reach any of my goals. And the other proverb is from Proverbs 6. This is about the ants. It says, take a lesson from the ants, you lazy bones. I like
the lazy bones.
Learn from their ways and become wise. They labor hard all summer, gathering food for the winter. And so we can take some lessons from the ants there. Nobody's really out there telling them exactly what to do, but they're diligently preparing for the winter by working now and working smart. And so we have two options here. We look at these verses. Is, do you want to be wise? The wise person is the one who seeks out knowledge and applies that knowledge to make some decisions so they can act on that knowledge. And they also use that knowledge to use self-control to restrain themselves from making poor decisions. And so I have invited two couples to our webinar today that I consider to be wise.
Yeah.
And I've known these couples for about 13 years, and I've witnessed them making wise decisions in that entire time. In regards to money, I've often sought them out in regards to money advice. And sometimes they may not even know it. I'm asking them questions, trying to get some information. But I've learned so much from them. And I'm really excited to have them on this webinar today to share what they have learned in their life through research and through experience with you today. And so I'd like to introduce, first of all, Rich and Michelle Hawthorne. Hello, Rich and Michelle.
Hello. Hello.
Hello down there.
Rich and Michelle, how long have you guys been married?
26 years.
26 years, amazing. And Rich and Michelle, in addition to being married 26 years, they have 4 adult children, and they own a small family business in the Bay Area. And so, right. We also have on our webinar today, Susumu and Lang. Susumu and Lang, welcome. How long have you guys been married?
Well, we had to do the math real fast. We're like, uh-oh. 28 years. 28 years.
Wow.
Yes. Yes.
You are the mature couple. In this
Uh-oh. Uh-oh.
Are we the oldest in terms of number of years married?
Yeah. I don't know about mature, but we are the older couple. We're still trying to mature.
Oh, that's good. And of course, both Rich and Michelle and Susuma and Lang, very involved at Bethel Church, very involved in multiple ministries at Bethel Church, and in lots of leadership roles as well. So this is how I'd like to run the webinar today. Is I titled it, how to avoid some common money mistakes in marriage. And so I'm going to ask a question, and then I'm going to allow both Rich and Michelle and Susuma and Lang to respond to those questions with, what they've learned about how to avoid that mistake, and then what would be the alternative, and what should they do instead of that so that they don't make those mistakes. And so why don't we jump right into these questions, and let's get started. So first question I have here is it a mistake when couples neglect to plan with their money? And if so, what are some things couples should be planning for right now?
Are you going to call on one of us to go first?
Jump right in.
So say it one more time, George, if you don't mind. So,
is it a mistake when couples neglect to plan with their money?
yeah, the answer to that is yes, it is a mistake. And that's coming from somebody who's probably made every mistake in the book. That picture you had with the money flying out the window? I probably should have just done that sometimes instead of some of the errors I made. But in some ways, that was a little bit of the tuition I paid to learn my lessons, and I learned them early on. I was fortunate to, once I started kind of coming to Bethel, really was probably the turning point. I met some older business people who I would ask questions to, and who spoke into my life, and I followed their instructions, and I began to pay debts off and begin to save and create a budget. And a lot of that had to do with really, like I said, right about the time when I moved here to California and started going to Bethel Church. So yes, the answer is you need to plan. And I don't know if you want to get into the different things of planning just yet, but maybe Susuma and Lang would want to jump in at this point.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, first off, thank you very much, Pastor George, for inviting us. I kind of have to say, when you first reached out, we didn't know how to take it. Is it like, the mistakes that couples have made in their finances, indirectly saying, I know, Susumu, and then you've made thousands of mistakes, so you'd be perfect. So I was like, okay, so we're happy to help out here. And like Rich said, I think we've made our fair share of mistakes along the way. To answer your question, I think one of the biggest mistakes people make is I've seen people spend more time planning their next vacation trip to Hawaii or research the next restaurant they're going to eat at on Yelp than they do putting together a sound financial plan. And I use that term broadly. Financial plan includes everything from the budgeting side to the goal setting to the actual investments. And I say, anything I say here tonight is not meant with any sort of malice or arrogance, because we were those people. We did spend days and days and days. She loves planning vacations, and she would spend days and days and days planning our next vacation. And then we'd look at our finances and go, next weekend, we'll take a look at it. And our approach was, honestly, we were shooting from the hip. We would listen in the hallway, talk to coworkers like what everyone does. You know, you think Tesla's the next hot thing. You think Google was this and all these other things. And really based on conversations, you think, sure, I'm going to buy it. Well, that's shooting from the hip. That's not a great way of investing. And what made it worse is we would do that year over year over year. And we get to the end of many years and we would just have a hodgepodge of investments that we had without talking about any goals or anything. So to answer your question, it's not going to be something easy. It is a little bit of a work, but I say the thing that they really should do now is sit down with your spouse and come up with a broad, comprehensive investment plan. And like doing a big remodel, like going off and getting starting a big business or a small business, it's a collection of many small steps. You're not going to sit down in 30 minutes and knock it out. Nothing great is achieved in 30 minutes, really. And so I would focus on the investment plan, getting that in order.
Yeah, I think like one biggest mistake early on is because I wasn't interested at all. I hate doing balancing checkbook. I hate budgeting, and I don't know anything about investment. And so I am not interested and I don't care. And so because of that, then Susum was pretty much on his own. And whenever he wanted to bring out a topic, I was like, let's plan for Hawaii. Let's decide which restaurant to go to. And so we always push it aside. So I would say that for married couple, especially the young married, well, it's never too late. I mean, both of you have to be involved in this planning for the money matters, whether it's spending, savings, or investment. Like both of you need to get involved as early as you can. So, tomorrow is Saturday, it's a new year. Go talk about money tomorrow. It's never too late to start. And just because if it is, you're just leaving it to one spouse, for my case, it's also Sumu, then he takes all the responsibility and all the burden, whether it's good or bad, and takes all the blame because I can blame him, because I wasn't involved, and that's just not fair, right? And that's when harsh decision and the conflicts between married happen because it's just one person and he deals with it all, and I don't take any responsibility at all.
Okay, so planning is important, and that's a big mistake that couples make when it comes to money, not knowing what their goals are and how they're going to get there. What's a practical first step for a couple to do right now that they can do tomorrow, or even if they want to stay up late tonight, they can do this even tonight? What can they do to get started if they have no plan? Rich?
Take that, Rich.
Well, I'll tell you what I did, and part of this is probably linked to a little bit of our story. So, those of you who are watching, we're small business owners. When we got married, I had a small business just getting started. Really didn't have hardly any money, just making it, month to month. And so we needed to create a budget, and I was, I looked at all our expenses, fixed expenses, variable expenses, anything that was like one expense that came in once a year, and I divided it by 12, and I would put all this money aside to make sure I wouldn't get surprised by anything. Putting money aside for vehicle repairs, because we were driving older cars. And so when I had extra money, I didn't really think about that this was extra money I could spend, because extra money was, I didn't know if I was going to have cavities that needed to be filled. So I needed to put some money away for those type of things. When kids came around, we began to save for their education. So a lot of future type of things. And then once all that was taken care of, if there was anything left over, That's what I considered was extra money. But at first there wasn't any of that. So yeah, creating a budget for sure.
I think also too, you need to talk together about where you see your life going. Do you want to have kids? Do you want to buy a house? All those kind of things that you decide together what you want to have in your life. Of course, it's never too early to start setting aside some money for retirement. And if you don't think about that, then you don't. You never have enough unless you plan for that. But when we first got married, like Rich said, he wasn't really making much money, and I had a good job. And but we talked about it. And when I had kids, I didn't want to work when they were little, and so he knew that was a goal of ours, and he got to work to get ready to prepare for that. Well, that's obviously not something that could happen, in spur of the moment, right? That's something that we had to plan and work for. So I think
trust the Lord for.
Absolutely. Because every situation will be different. So.
Okay, so thinking about your future and making sure you have the immediate, your hard expenses, put that aside before you start investing. That's what they can do right now. So Suma Lang, what can they do tonight or tomorrow morning? What can couples do to start planning right now?
Yeah. So at least my opinion, I'm going to give a little bit of a meta, more along the lines of what Michelle was saying. The first thing you guys really should do is not so much run out to the next bill and pay it off, but you should sit down in a nice quiet place like your clean kitchen table or your dining room table and start your family meeting with prayer. And pray that the Lord would guide you in the conversation and that you would be open and non-judgmental and non-reactive. The danger in all of this financial thing is it touches something so deep in our fears. One part could have grown up in a poorer environment. One could have grown up in a richer environment. So they come to the table with very, very different expectations. And you can't talk about money without it being a little emotional, fearful, personal, and all of the above. And then the first part of the meeting, the goal of that first, let's say 1 hour or 2 hour meeting is not to necessarily hash out every last detail, but to come up with a list of things you want to talk about. And I 100 agree with some of the things, well, everything that Rich and Michelle said, but talk about what are your goals, having a family and kids, and who is going to be working. Sometimes both want to work, sometimes one does not want to work. And I've seen that be really big conflict in families. And so when couples start jumping into doing without talking about the underlying assumptions, that doing ends up creating an awful lot of conflict. And so, but to give kind of a practical, if someone wanted to jump into the doing, the thing that I'm usually most concerned about is credit card debt. Credit card debt tends to be the most expensive thing that is a millstone around your neck, and credit card debt just needs to get hammered out as quickly as possible. And so if you want to jump to the doing part, just hammer that credit card debt down to nothing. That's kind of evil, really.
We agree on that for sure.
Yeah. Okay. And so we talk about planning, we talk about setting these goals, and one thing that is in all of our futures is retirement. We're all going to get there, right? And so why is it a mistake for a couple to postpone starting to prepare for their retirement savings? Susuma?
Okay. The real reason comes down to kind of a mathematical thing of compounding. In general, depends which numbers you look at, whether you look at a 30-year look back, a 60-year look back. But in general, the stock market, which is where most of retirement investments are invested, in general, that has done about 10% a year on average, decade over decade. And so I think we have two different anecdotes we talked about, Pastor George, but one very simple anecdote is if you, let's say you did one thing and you invested, let's say 10,000, I know it's a lot of money, but you invested $10,000 this year and you did absolutely nothing but left it in the market for the next 20 years. And then you said, well, gee, I'm 45 now. And let's say you had a twin brother and he didn't do that. And the twin brother said, oh my gosh, I'm 45 years old now. I better start saving for my retirement. Well, in that year, that twin brother would have to pony up about $70,000 because of the power of compounding. And so I think there's another example with lattes and whatnot. I think, Pastor George, did you want to share that one? Or?
Yeah, sure. So in one of the books that I'm reading right now that I actually have on the recommendation list at bethel.org/marriage, Smart Couples Finish Rich, they use the example of people saying that they don't have enough to save for retirement. And they talk about the coffees that many of us drink that cost about $5 a piece. And so if a couple is drinking 2 cups of coffee a day, that's $10 a day. That $10 a day, if they'll start when they're in their 20s, can grow to an unbelievable $3 million. And so, Rich, you're talking, Susan, you're talking about compounding interest. $10 a day isn't really, doesn't seem like a lot, but if you wait, then you're never going to get to the $3 million mark.
Yeah, that's only about $3,600 a year, far less than my 10,000 amount, but that's every year. And it really doesn't seem like it works, but trust me, I put these numbers into a spreadsheet and it actually works. It comes out like, like $3 million. Oh, I should have done that 30 years ago.
He loves spreadsheet and he's quite good at it. So you trust him on that. And so I think like for people that work for companies, that company has a 401k. We'll really recommend that the moment you start working, you should contribute to your 401k and contribute to IRA yearly. So start the year that you started work, start doing that. And so to let the compound interest does its magic.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially those that have those matching programs. We have a daughter that works and they'll match a little bit of it. We tell her, take advantage of that. Just do it. It's free money.
Free money, yes.
Yeah, George, I think also too, it's just human nature. We're procrastinators, right? I remember vividly when I was 25. I don't know why I thought this, but I thought, it didn't take very long to be 25. So if I double that, I'm 50. So I maybe should start doing something now to plan for that. And I'm fortunate that I thought that at that time, And for me, it was probably drawing on a little bit of my experience. I'm a musician, I practice, so I needed to just begin the practice of putting some money away for retirement. And at the beginning, it was $25 or something. It was just, so if you haven't started, my advice is just get started with something. Just if you have no retirement account, open up one. They're very easy to do online. Get an IRA going and start putting some money in it and do it automatic. We do it now where it's just automatically taken out. I don't even think about it. And, so get started and begin the practice of saving right now.
So I was having a conversation with Susuma Lang. I probably had the same conversation with Rich and Michelle, but there was a conversation about the power of pre-tax investments. And so we're talking about $10 a day of investing, but what does that actually equal if you'll do it as a pre-tax withdrawal? Susuma Lang?
Not sure I understood the question, but $10 after, you'd have to earn roughly, let's say, $15 before tax. And so, any one of those vehicles, whether it's a health savings account, whether it's an IRA, 401k, that is pre-tax, I absolutely love the double and triple benefits you're getting, because when it comes to, if you're like me, TurboTax time, but when it comes to around April 15th, instead of making 100 units of money, the government thinks you only made 98 units of money because, 1 or 2,000 of those dollars, or hopefully much more than that, went pre-tax into your retirement account. And then, of course, the power of compounding without having to pay the taxes, and then it grows tax deferred, depending upon the account you have, grows tax deferred until you choose to take it out.
So the example of, let me give you, see if I can jog your memory, but I believe we were talking about how if you will do it pre-tax, then you immediately have a return on investment. So earlier you mentioned that the stock market has historically done about 10%. And a lot of my reading when it comes to mutual funds, that they're trying to find a mutual fund that beats the market. They do all of this research on how to find a mutual fund that'll beat the market. Well, if you'll do it pre-tax, you immediately beat the market in year one. Do you remember having that conversation with me?
Yes, I do. And yeah, it's basically, I've met some people that said, well, I'm not sure I want to, because they're non-committal, they want to put money into a retirement fund where they can't touch it for the next 3 or 4 decades, whatever. They say, I'll take all my money, and then from there I'll invest some in this stock and that stock. And I'm saying, dude, right off the bat, $100, you have to pay, $20, $30 to the government, California state and federal combined. The tax. And so the $100, you're only left with $70 that you could work with. If you started out at 100 and put it right into the 401k or the IRA or whatnot, that $100 could start to grow from there. And so when you're at $70, you have to grow roughly 40%, 45% to get up, just back up to your 100 in your first year. And so I would take that any day, a 40% return in any year. Someone could give that to me, guaranteed.
Rich, Michelle, anything to add on that?
I just totally agree, and those type of things really become evident as you begin to do your taxes. So if you're following these savings plans, like Susumu, it's TurboTax time for me too. So you see it in real time. I put this away, I see how much I'm saving on my taxes. So it's a win-win to do it.
And there's still time to actually put money in 2020 to lower the amount of money you pay in taxes.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. And I don't know if it helps if there's people out there that own their own businesses that are watching. But, the one thing that we all have in common is we're paying our own health insurance. We're not getting any paid vacation or anything like that. So it was important for us to have the HSA as well. So we do save for medical expenses, and there's a tax advantage to having an HSA. So things like that. We took advantage of just anything we could, a SEP retirement account, which is a self-employed retirement account. Things like that are available just really helped us save on our tax liabilities.
So to summarize that, couples make the mistake of throwing money out the window by not taking advantage of the tax savings that the federal government, state governments have offered for saving for retirement. They are encouraging you to save for retirement by giving you a huge discount on your taxes, better than some of the very best mutual funds could ever claim to achieve. And so you want these great, people want great returns. Well, there's your great return. Take advantage of it. But it hurts a little bit because it is something that is far in the future. But think about the ant. The ant goes out and diligently works because winter is coming. And look at winter is getting a little closer. A little close. So, yeah.
Hey, Pastor
right.
George?
Yeah.
Pastor. Yeah, I just want to emphasize that point that Rich made. If the listeners are not familiar with something he talked about, HSA, Health Savings Account, it is really the best thing in retirement since sliced bread. It's come on the scene about 10 years ago. It's something that's called triple advantage. You get the tax write-off going in, it grows tax deferred. And if you take money out for medical expenses, you could take it out tax-free. And so please write that down, HSA, and look it up on the web, and maybe some of the people could take advantage of that.
Now, that's different than the other health savings account where you had to use it by the end of the year?
It's very different. What you're referring to is something called an FSA, Flexible Savings Account. This is a health savings account. It serves a dual purpose. If you put money in and don't touch it, when you're 65, you could actually take it out for general retirement purposes. And if you do that, you take it out and you pay taxes on it. So in that regard, it is like a deductible IRA, because this year that we put money in, we're able to deduct it from our taxes. However, if next year or 5 or 10 or 20 years from now, you have a 2,000, 5,000, whatever medical bill, and you want to use your HSA to pay for that medical bill, you could take the money out of your HSA and, you know, pay Kaiser or pay your pharmacy or whatever, and you don't have to pay any taxes on it. So I've intentionally gone out of my way to make sure we have a high deductible health plan so that we are legally allowed to contribute money into this health savings account. You could only contribute if you have a high deductible health plan.
Wow.
And so that's pretty much the gist of it, but I think the listeners should definitely write down HSA and do more research, or talk to me or Rich afterwards, and then we could fill you in on the little bits that we know about it.
Yep.
Now, do you guys think that we're going to have medical expenses when we're retired?
I think so.
All right. So might as well get the tax deduction now. So we're talking about saving for retirement. It seems so far in the future. Do you think couples, I mean, how big of a mistake is it for them to spend all their money on their living expenses now and not save for the future? And what percentage do you think they should be setting as a goal to save for the future? Rich, Michelle?
Seems like you're about to say something.
I was just going to say, I think everybody is at a different place, right? Some people might feel like they really are just living paycheck to paycheck. And I think that even part of your planning process can be, how are we going to make more money so that we're not living paycheck to paycheck, you know? So I think everybody has to start with where they're at, right, and then go on from there.
Yeah, exactly. I don't have a percentage, but I would say as much as you can, and because different times of your life, there's times when you don't have much, and maybe you're in a time when you have a little more resources. We're at a point where we try to max out what we're legally able to do in our IRA and our HSA. There are limits to what you can put in, obviously, for those that have it. You can't put in as much as you want. So we do our best to maximize what we're, the vehicles that we have, our retirement vehicles. But we understand that, there was a time when we couldn't, but we did something. We at least did something towards it.
Yeah, and I would echo everything 100%. Boy, to say a percent not knowing the specifics, if someone is living closer to paycheck, it's really hard to come out of the gate and say 10%, 20%. That just doesn't make sense. And then someone else who's in a different situation. But I would say it this way: you had kind of two questions in there. The first is using everything they have on living expenses now. Well, assuming it's an option where they can cut back, I would say you are sacrificing a very, very dangerous future for the present. And what is the danger in that future? It's called your human capital, your ability to earn a paycheck, to make income. Your ability to make an income when you're younger is far stronger than when you're 75, 85, 95. I think that goes without saying. And so what you are doing, if you're kind of living moderate or high off the hog now, thinking, oh, I have plenty of time to catch up, I'm here to say many times it doesn't work out that way. I've had some conversations with some people that are well into their 60s, and they're telling me, and I should say late 60s, and they're telling me, I don't know if I could retire. And there's a difference. Retirement is neither good nor bad. There's a difference. If you want to retire and you can't, that's unfortunate. If you love your job and you love what you're doing and you just want to work because your work is like your hobby, then that's different. But this individual, she was telling me with a heavy tone of sadness that she doesn't think she could retire anytime soon. And so because of that, I felt kind of pain and sorrow for that situation. So you say something? So as much as you can.
Yeah. And I think, like, you know, for people that want to enjoy life now for the moment, as much as you can seems to be really vague. So I think that's why it's so important for you and your spouse to sit together to say, what is my goal, right? If you're saying, hey, you know, we'll save as much as we can so that we can buy a house. And okay, so at least you have a goal of buying a house in 5 years, 10 years. So you know that when you don't go out to eat one week, when you don't buy the Starbucks tomorrow morning, you know that you are saving towards that house. Or like, even if it's kind of something closer, to say, hey, let's have a short vacation somewhere. So we're saving for the vacation, right? So having a goal makes saving easier, because you are not just like, you know, suffering every day and not having any, not living a little, not even living a little. Having a goal help you to say, okay, I'm sacrificing this temporary, you know, short-term pleasure for a long-term, you know, good.
Yeah, I think what Lang is saying is really important. You know, if you don't know why, people who don't know why quit is what they do. And so if you know why you're not going out to eat as much, or you know why you're going to start making your coffee at home, and you have those goals, it makes it easier for sure. Yeah, good point.
Yeah, so I would summarize that one a big mistake that couples make then is just not talking about, I mean, even this percentage question. You know, I've heard people say, when you get it, you know, tithe 10%, save 10%. I've even heard people say, no, you need to save 20%. Imagine if one spouse makes that decision without really saying why we're going to do it, because they heard it on a radio show that this is what they should do. Yeah. Imagine the conflict that's going to get started in that marriage. Yeah. But it's good to hear both of you couples mention that a set percentage isn't the primary goal. Having the conversation about what you're going to do is the primary goal, and then start to work on that goal, and then you can celebrate that. It reminds me about that book. The author in Smart Couples Finish Rich does talk about one of the first things that he asks couples, because he's a financial planner. He says, is what's important to you, so that they can get to the point of what is the purpose of money and what's the purpose of how you spend it and save it. And so understanding what you value. And so I think that's really important that you guys both said that, because it's important to know the why before you start doing things. That's good. All right, so the next question I want to ask you about is timing the market. Is it a mistake for couples to think that they can predict when the stock market or the real estate market is going to go up or down? And why is that, if you believe that it's a mistake?
Well, I'll speak because I'm probably the most naive in this area. So again, I said that I wasn't interested, so I didn't really study investing and all this stuff. And then so when I hear from my coworkers, my friends, and you know, anyone, and to talk about, oh, the stock market is really hot now, I'll come back to tell Susumu, how come you're not buying? How come we're not doing 20% return a month? You know, and because it's all the hype, and me and Susumu survived through the dot-com boom, and we knew what that means. And because I don't understand the market and don't understand the hype, I was complaining to Susumu, how come he didn't buy all these IPO stocks, right? Even though they are like, all this company that are not very sound financially. And then the same thing, right? When the stock market dropped, I was like in fear that we have so much money in it, and really want him to pull them all out, because let's say the 2008 housing market crash, right? And I said we should get out now, right? Because I'm not educated in the stock market being volatile up and down. And so if you are not educated, then you're really trying to time the market, which is totally the wrong thing to do.
Yeah, so let me answer your question this way. So many people I talk to, and especially the guy in the mirror that looks back at me, many people think they could time the market because they think they're smarter than the average guy. But let's kind of dissect what they're really saying. What they're saying is they're in the position of God, basically, and that they know what the future is going to hold. But that sounds almost kind of sacrilegious. Let's dissect it further. They believe they know what's going to happen with interest rates, with the election, with various tweets from different officials, with what China's going to do, with what all the money managers are going to do, with what coronavirus is going to do, with whether a CEO is going to have a heart attack, with whether litigations are or are not going to happen, whether an earthquake is going to hit the center of Silicon Valley. And they know how all that is then going to affect the market tomorrow or the next day. And so when you phrase it that way, it sounds absolutely ludicrous that people know when things are going to kind of go up or down in kind of the daily and the weekly thing versus I'm not talking about a trend over decades. And so timing the market fundamentally for 99.9% of the people does not work. A big reason it doesn't work from my reading and my observation is because when you invest, there's basically two emotional forces at work. There's the fear and there's the greed. But the psychologists actually tend to tell us that the fear is significantly stronger than the greed. And I've seen it play out over time, and the numbers play out that when let's take the 2008 housing crash. I don't know the exact numbers, you could Google this, but I remember reading a few articles which said at the low or toward the low, some big, huge number, $5 or $10 billion of money flowed out of the market and into money market funds. And they get these numbers by looking at Vanguard and Charles Schwab and E-Trade and Fidelity, looking at all of these counts collectively and running their big data analysis on it. And then they said something sadder, that a lot of that money sat there for 2 years before moving back into the market, which tells me that their fear got them out of the market, a great amount of fear, their smaller amount of greed kept them at check, and they lost a good 50% or 100% even on the upside before getting back in. Fundamentally, what they were doing is they were timing the market. They said, I know it's going to fall further, I'm going to get out. And it just pains me that $2 billion was just wrong. And these aren't the big people. These are, people like us. And so every time I've tried it, I've seemed to have failed more than I've succeeded. Then I'm like, but what am I doing here?
Rich, Michelle?
Yeah, that fear that Susumu was talking about is, they call that the fear of missing out, right? So people see it happening all around them. People seem to be getting rich, and of course, when the market goes up, everybody feels like a genius, right? And I boil it down to two things. When I'm investing or spending my money, am I investing or am I speculating? And my dad used to always tell me, never risk money that you can't afford to lose. So if you know that that's what you're doing and you have some money to lose, you just need to understand that. But it's not a good long-term strategy, obviously, because you can't continue to lose money. So it would be better to take a more longer-term approach to things, which is what I would call investing and not speculating. So speculating sort of encapsulates everything Susumu was just talking about. You know, that is very rampant right now in our culture and society.
Yeah.
Yeah, we
That's
definitely hear a lot about that right now. It's hard when you hear other people around you celebrating how much money they've made. I mean, you hear about the cryptocurrency market right now, and some of the exciting clean energy companies that. And then the thing that scares me a lot is when people say you can't lose. You don't even need to think about it. Just get it. Just get it. And people do. They're not really thinking about the risk that's involved. And so one of the things that I learned again through mistakes, because I thought I could time the market when I was in my 20s, and lost all the savings we had when we were in our 20s. That wasn't a good day, and I had to tell a dean I did that. But
Of course, Nadine didn't know. See, that is the first mistake, that she didn't know.
I knew.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
I may have framed it. It wasn't as risky, but it was risky.
It was a guarantee.
I have since learned through several books that helps me is the percentage of professional money managers that actually do not beat the market on a regular basis. So people whose full-time job is to find the stocks that are going to do better than if they would have just invested in an index fund. Because you can invest in an index fund with very, very low fees through like Vanguard. And so a lot of these money managers, you pay them to try and beat the market. And I believe the percentage is something like 85% of professional money managers consistently do not. Maybe they'll beat it one year, but over a 5-year, 10-year period, they're not beating it. 85%. I don't have a full-time job as a money manager, and I don't have their education, and I don't know their knowledge. So why do I think that I can do better than them? And so that was a mistake I made early on that I have since learned I can't do that. So now what will I do? So let's talk about that. What can we do? If we're not going to time the market, we have to have some type of investment strategy. What investment strategy would you guys recommend rather than trying to pick the next great IPO? What's an alternative that is really a win over the long haul, like the ant does? What would you recommend to our couples? Rich?
well, go ahead, Rich.
Okay, well, there's a concept in investing that they call dollar cost averaging, and that's probably, over the long term, the best approach. And that's a little bit of what Susumu was getting at. You're going to be investing at times when the market is high, but you're also going to be investing at times when the market is low. Fortunately, my dad did a really great thing with my brother and I early on. He got us involved in stocks early on, and he set up a dividend reinvestment portfolio for us. So we got interested in companies, and we could set up buy stock in the companies and set up this dividend reinvestment thing. So I got to see that work early on, where I would get a dividend and would buy me a portion of the share of the stock. Sometimes the stock was up, sometimes it was down. And when it was down, I actually was kind of excited a little bit because I got to buy a little bit more when my dividend came out. So that, when it comes to the market, probably the best approach is the dollar cost average. What would you say, Susumu?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Using a slightly different vehicle. So there's two types of people when it comes to this regard. Those who are very interested and want to pursue stock picking as a hobby, of course, in order to make money, to have your investments grow. And those that are much less interested in it and say, you know what, I'm not that interested in it. I'm gonna go with the mutual funds. And so if most people tend to fall into the I'm not super interested in it, it's money is a vehicle for pursuing other goals for me. And so for the vast majority of those people, my recommendation would get concrete and boil down to something like the following. I would strongly consider choosing Vanguard funds, but nowadays, especially over the last 3 years, whether it's Charles Schwab or Fidelity, they've all gotten extremely competitive. I would choose a collection of index funds, say at Vanguard, and put the vast majority of my savings into a broad collection of large cap, mid cap, small cap. There's the entire market, there's the S&P 500, there's international index funds. But the key being index funds, because of what Pastor George directly said, that something like 80+% of active fund managers do not beat the index. And so I would put the vast majority in there. Now, I said vast majority. I didn't say 100%. Why is that? Well, because I know a lot of, I guess it tends to be men. A lot of men tend to be human. And in that humanity,
and women are
yeah, and women are not human.
Women are goddesses.
I should have said very, very flawed human. They have the itch. They want to see if they could do better. And I'm willing to agree with what I've read in 100 different places where they say, well, if you really can't control yourself, men or women, then maybe take some very small amount. And it might be 2%, 3%, 4%. But number one, you better agree with your spouse what that number is. And then you do your own trading or investing as you see fit. So if you said, I really want to buy Google, and I'm going to put all $2,000 into Google, well, as long as your spouse agrees, you do that. And then after 7 years, you'll realize that the index fund was still better. But I do believe that's important because it's very hard, this investing thing. It's very hard to reconcile what the mind knows, but what the heart wants to do. I remember having a conversation 4 years ago with some folks, and independently they came up to me and they say, hey, what do you think about so-and-so? We probably should pull some of our funds out of the market. And I said, you know, my heart agrees with you because I'm scared. This market's high, but my mind knows better. No, my opinion is we really should keep our investments in that market. And then like an hour later, a different person came up to me and had that same conversation. And so what I'm acknowledging in that is that there is that tension between the heart and the mind. The mind should do 98% of your funds what is right. But let the heart have some satisfaction, and I'd be okay with, you know, a little bit of that. If someone said they wanted to put a couple thousand into Google, I'd say, okay, you go do that.
Mm-hmm. I think that's really good that you, Rich, I know we've talked about individual stocks too, so I imagine you do a little bit of that as well, you and Michelle.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that goes back to what I said earlier. You know what you have available to risk and only risk what you're willing to lose.
Yeah. Good. Well, we have had such a good time talking. We've actually passed the time that I wanted to open up to questions and answers. And so, Cassie, if you could turn on the question and answers there. I want to give our participants an opportunity to ask questions about Lang and Susumu and Michelle and Rich to be able to answer some of these questions. And so as those questions were coming up, I had a similar conversation with Matt Blankenship about this, that, you know, I had, you know, even though I learned my lesson in my 20s about investing and sticking with the, you know, an index fund and doing the dollar cost, I still felt like, man, maybe I should have bought Apple or Google. And so one thing I did was buy an index or an EFT that was technology funds. So then I wasn't trying to pick, well, which one of those? I'll just buy this. And it's amazing, when I did that, that itch kind of went away. You know, because I felt like anytime the news was saying, hey, Google just went up 3%, I felt like, well, now I have this EFT that's the technology. I'm part of those winners. And so, but it didn't interfere with my main retirement account. And so, yeah. All right, let's see. I've got a question here. It says, my husband and I differ about tithing versus net versus gross. How can we budget together in this area? Good question. Very good question. Now, Rich or Michelle, would you like to answer that question about how can a couple come to an agreement about should they be tithing off their net or off of their gross?
Oh, again, I think that's. How would you want to answer that?
Well, our circumstances are different, and they have been for a long time because we don't have, sometimes our.
Well, I mean, we own a business, right? I mean, we can't tithe off our gross because sometimes the margin's not there, right? So, it's I have always thought to myself, I'm going to leave the answers for tithing to the ministers. And I'm going to tell people when it comes to giving, you're going to have to give, like the Bible says, cheerfully, not under compulsion, because the Lord loves a cheerful giver. And you're going to have to start with whatever you feel that you can do it happily.
Yeah.
So again, it's so hard to give specifics and say, now you have to do it that way. So, I'm going to say defer that and say, this is something that you guys have to pray about, and you have to do something that you can do cheerfully so that the Lord can honor it.
Yeah. So, Dean, remember we had Pastor Womack, the pastor. He actually used to talk about this from the pulpit when we were in our 20s. And because he would get that question, that was, we graduated from high school in 1989, for those of you who are here. So it's a long time ago, this question. This is not a new question. And he would say it this way. He says, well, do you want God to bless you on your gross, or do you want God to bless you on your net? And so, bottom line was, that's a discussion that you and your spouse can have. And I've always advised couples, whatever decision you come to is the right decision for you. God's he's not punitive. He's not going to punish you. Tithe on what you think is right, but make sure you're in agreement. That's more important than whether it's gross or net. So.
Yeah, and I will add to that. I mean, whether it's gross or net, start, just tithe, right?
Right.
I think because 10% is a lot of money. It doesn't matter how much you make or how little you make. 10% is a lot of money, and God doesn't need our money. I think tithing is a way for God to really, let us know who is the boss, right? Do we want to be slave to money, or do we want to be, have God to be our master? And tithing is a discipline to really show that, hey, prove it that God is our master. And so we are not, slave to all the money and the purchase of them in pursuing the money. So just tithe, and, whether it's net or gross is, minor point.
Yeah, I agree 100% with everything that's been said. It's definitely a personal thing. I will add a little further. If someone wanted to push me, my opinion would be I go for gross. That's what I would do. In the absence of any other information, I'm not saying that dogmatically. I'm not saying that looking down on anyone. But just my personal approach would be toward gross. And so maybe one could, if there are two different opinions, at least there's two different opinions, maybe one could start at one level and start moving up in faith toward the other. And again, along with that movement upward, there's a lot of conversation and prayer that's happening.
Yeah, and I just the big picture too, George. We're talking a lot about, when it comes to finances, there can be a lot of fear and there can be a lot of greed. And, it's interesting, in the Bible, when Jesus talks about greed, he says, watch out, right? Be on your guard against greed. And it's interesting that he says that. He's basically saying, because you can be greedy and not even know it. And there's a remedy to fear and greed, and that's giving. There's something about when you give, it conquers greed, it conquers fear, and it's a way of recognizing where your provision is coming from. because you can tithe out of fear, and it's for the wrong reasons, right? Your giving should be from your heart in a way to give back to the Lord. And if I can recommend, I think the first place to give is a church. I think communities need churches. And so if you're going to start giving to a church.
Amen.
Amen.
Bethel's a good church too, by the way.
Great church.
Double amen.
There's a quick question somebody's wanting to know about any apps that you would recommend for budgeting. I use Mint, but that's not really for budgeting as much as just so I can keep track of my expenses and make sure no fraudulent charges came through.
I don't use any apps in particular.
No.
Yeah, sorry, I don't really use any apps, but what I do is try and run everything through a central place, like a credit card that gets paid off at the end of the month. And then you have one place where you could see every last Starbucks charge, every Target charge, every Amazon.com charge that comes across. Because in prior times, when you're paying, a third of your Starbucks by cash, and the fishing reel by cash, and then the big dinners by credit card, and then it's like, I don't even know what's going out of our account. But when we started just funneling everything through two places, then with the different online stuff, online accounts, you could see the pie chart and everything on our, like we have a couple city accounts. But as far as the actual apps, I don't personally use them. So I can't answer that question, sorry.
Okay. It's like we got a question here about living in the Bay Area, high cost of living, and what would you recommend if one parent wants to stay home with the kids for a period of time, but you don't think you can afford it?
Well, I think it's something that you need to pray about. I think there are a lot of expenses that can be cut if it's something that's important to you. You don't have to have cable TV, and different things like that you can set aside if that's a priority for you. We honestly, lived simply so that I could stay home. We didn't buy brand new cars, and we lived in a smaller house, but that it was the trade-off that we wanted. And so right. There are things that can be done, but I would pray about it. Maybe you can work different, I don't know exactly, but there's options. So I know God has a plan, and if it's something that God wants you to do, he'll provide a way.
Yeah, don't ever underestimate that part of it, right? Like, you might not be able to see a possibility of how that can work, but you got to leave some possibilities open to what the Lord can do in your life. Always be open to great things happening. That's what we saw in our life. It's really the story of our life, because when we decided that Michelle would stay home with the kids, I didn't know how that was going to work. It didn't seem possible. But then the Lord showed up, and he did some things that made it possible. So pray about that. Be open to it, because you don't know the ideas that the Lord may give you. He might give you ideas of how you can get promoted at your work. That makes it possible all of a sudden. Or there's a new job opportunity, and now it's possible all of a sudden. So if you leave yourself open to the possibilities of what our great God can do, right? You don't know. You just don't know. So keep it in your prayers, and just keep the faith. Don't rule it out. Okay.
Just one last thing. When I walked away from my job, I remember thinking, like, okay, God, now it's all up to you, because I really felt like God provided the business, the customers and things for Rich's business. But God provided my job too, mm-hmm. right? So it was always all up to God. Yeah. But I didn't really feel like I was putting it in his hands until, right. I left my job. But, like I said, all your income right. is from the Lord.
Don't forget, whatever your paycheck says, it might say Apple or Google, forget about that. it's Christ that provides for us. And whatever job you have, he gave it to you. And he can provide you with a different job. He can give you promotions. Just be open to those possibilities.
Yeah, and I wanted to convey a story. This to me is an extremely important decision this couple is going through. I was having a conversation with a couple and extended family members on this very topic, and it pained me greatly that they did not sit down and talk it through and talk about all the different ways that they could make it work. The words I remember the wife telling me was, I want to take time off and raise our kids, but he wants me to work. And it pained me greatly to hear that. And I agree completely with Rich and Michelle that both on the tactical side, there's a lot of things that one can do. One could downgrade in the apartment from a 2-bedroom to 1-bedroom, move to a different area. I know it's a little sketchy, it's a little smaller, but hey, life is about sacrifices. And on that sacrifice, you will get something so precious as allowing the one spouse to be at home during those very formative years to raise that child. You will never, ever, ever have that again. And when you're sitting with your big retirement and you've got all these dollar signs coming out, you're not going to care about another 10 or 20 grand in your account. You're going to look back either with joy that you as a couple, with God as your shepherd, were able to do it, or you're going to look back at as a sore point that still causes friction in your marriage. And so when it's impossible, God seems to show up and say, I'm the God of the possible.
Very well said.
And I think like one thing is, I think Rich touched on it a little bit, is instead of spending lots of time trying to do budget, trying to do investing, trying to make money, one of the best way to make money is actually invest in your career, right? I mean, why not spend those time worrying and budgeting and all that? I mean, after praying, it's like, hey, maybe you should work on getting a next degree so that you can get that promotion. Maybe you should work on something that will let you get the promotion faster. Maybe take a class that will open up more opportunity for you. And don't, invest in your career, and that is where your paycheck comes from, right? And so that will advance you. It's not just like, a slow advancement. Potentially it's a step function if you make those investment steps towards your career.
So we are beyond our deadline of time, but I didn't want to stop the conversation because it's so good. But before we conclude here today, is there one small piece of advice you want to make sure that everybody takes away today, and give you each couple one last opportunity to just give a piece of advice or to reiterate a piece of advice for all the couples watching today?
I'll start since I think I'm the first one to speak. And for those wife or husband that are not interested in money, not interested in investment or all those, I said, get interested so that you can be a partner with your spouse, and so be educated. And for me as a Sumu, we actually do annual review to kind of go through the stuff, and he will present, he will tell me what happened and the budget and the plan and things like that. And so then we are on the same page, just like whatever means to get to the same page so that you have a common goal, common discussion, and so that you don't decide those really difficult things in the heat of the situation, right? Just have a plan, and that should start from the very beginning. Just work together versus having a separate thing.
Yeah, maybe to reiterate, set aside 2 hours on a Saturday to have a family meeting on the finances. Have the agenda of what you need to talk about, whether it's debt, whether it's investing, whether it's raising children, or the spouse taking time off. Have one spouse start in prayer, have the other spouse end in prayer. And it's hard to stay angry at your spouse when you're the one ending in prayer. It's just hard to be like good this way but mad that way. But you got to start it and end it in prayer and chip away at it. And remember, At the end of the day, money is a tool. Money is not for the sake of money. And boy, the tool had better be also creating happiness and some good stuff for your family. Your spouse is one of them. And so if you're arguing about that, $5 latte and it ends up being horrible, you guys really need to be back in prayer. I'm sorry. You need to be back in prayer.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say that, I do think that you as a couple need to take everything before the Lord, and you're not compare with what other people are doing, right? It's God has a plan for you and your life. Obviously, if you're going to go off and be missionaries, your plan is going to look very different from someone who's, staying here and working, So really just looking at what God wants for your life. So.
Yeah, and I would just say, like I was saying earlier, really recognize who your provider is. We really do have a way of trying to take these things into our own hands and thinking that we're in control of these things. There's so much that we're just not in control of. But we can count on that God is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And I've always have operated my business planning that I'm going to be around for another 25 or 30 years, but recognizing it could be all over tomorrow. But even if it was, it doesn't mean God's all over with me, right? He just has another plan. And so you need to really evaluate, where are you putting your trust? Is your trust, are you feeling safe and secure because you have a bank balance? Or do you feel safe and secure because you're secure in the Lord? And that's where you always have to direct your attention and make sure Christ is in the center of everything that you do. So that would be my advice.
Amen.
Amen.
I thank you for the words of wisdom you shared with us today. I wholeheartedly agree. I look back at our marriage, and we have had the very, very, very lean years, especially when we decided that I would stay home with the boys. So we have looked back at those lean years, and they weren't so lean after all. When you give things and you release it into the Lord's hands, it's amazing how much He grows things in every area, including your finances. So I just would encourage everyone to constantly challenge yourself to put your full trust, especially in this area, into the Lord's hands and allow Him to do the miraculous in the area of your finances. You will not be displeased, or you'll be pleasantly surprised many, many times, as we have been throughout our years of marriage.
Mm-hmm. God has definitely been our provider. Yeah. So a lot of questions we didn't get to answer there, but I'd like to refer you to some resources that I have posted on bethel.org/marriage. Cassie, if you could put that slide up. I put together some books, and this is just a screenshot of some of the books that you'll find there in the links at that bethel.org/marriage. And so those are some of my favorite books in terms of money. There's some books in there from our panelists as well. And there's some additional links if you'll go to that page. And so I'd recommend that you'll find one of those that you find interesting and pick it up and start to read. You will be better for it. You will definitely learn something. And so I found all of these to really be consistent in terms of how to move forward and to answer a lot of the questions that were seen in the Q&A. And also would like to highlight that this is the first marriage webinar of 2021, but we have one already scheduled later on this year. And so I want to make sure everybody knows about that date. It's going to be April the 16th, another Friday evening. And we're going to be talking about improving communication in marriage. A lot of what we talked about today in terms of money kind of kept coming back around to communication. And so we're going to take a whole nother webinar and we're going to talk about communication. And we'll probably have a little bit of conflict resolution in there as well. And so, because, a lot of times when you start to talk, you have a little bit of conflict. So yeah. So anyways, we want to continue to find these resources. We're going to post this recording at that page as well, bethel.org/marriage, so that if you want to share it with others, you can find one easy place to find all these resources for the events, as well as past webinars and the links for future resources. I want to thank everybody for joining us today on this webinar and sticking with us a little bit past our hour there, but I think well worth it. So Rich, Michelle, Susumu, and Lang, thank you so much. Thank you for being my friends. Thank you for sharing your wisdom with me and with all of our panelists. And thank you for who you are as Christ followers and as servant leaders in many areas of your life, including church.
Thanks for having
Thank you
us.
so much, Pastor
Thank
George.
you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Good
you
night.
for inviting us. Bye-bye.
All right, God bless you guys.
Thanks for joining us.
All right,
God bless.
See you
Bye-bye.
on Sunday.
conversation today or tomorrow. Plan it out.
Yes, that's right.
All right. Bye-bye. Thank
Bye-bye.
you.